Uh, Hi guys. Shout out to the uh, organizers and for extending the invitation to me. So what I'll be looking at is conceptualizing the debt crisis and also financing needs for climate stabilization in the global south, particularly low income and lower middle income country, highlighting the dilemma that they face with these overlapping emergencies. So the motivation for this working paper is to look at the financial landscape and ask the question, why is it that developing countries aren't mobilizing funds towards green investment? And we put forward one reason for that, which is debt servicing. So if you look at the global landscaping for financing climate mitigation and adaptation, it has been increasing. It's the last IEA report that came out is glowing positively. That $1.3 billion of the 2.8 expected to go towards clean energy would be in renewable. The 2.0 trillion towards energy investment, of that 1.7 trillion will go towards clean energy. And this, for the first time, clean energy investment outpaced fossil fuel investment on a per dollar basis. Now, the climate crisis isn't the only crisis that developing countries face, and the crisis is an overlapping emergency between debt and also the climate as well. And therefore, in this paper, I seek to conceptualize all of this. So I try to explore the debt crisis and explain why there is low investment in climate stabilization among developing countries, but by first looking at the public-private sector rate of investment, both in developed and developing countries. Then I showed that if you look at fossil fuel producing low-income and lower middle-income countries that are considered debt stress or in some sort of debt emergency, there's oftentimes a heavy reliance on these natural resources, which further exacerbate a lot of the climate issues and also the debt crisis, and I will highlight that as I go along. So I propose that if developing countries are to actually extend clean energy and adopt climate stabilization policies, then debt forgiveness and debt reduction must be at the center of climate stabilization policy in general. So if you look at the overall trend in renewable investment globally, you'll see that private funds have the larger share. However, there's been an increase in public investment over the years, starting from 2017. You can harken this back to the 14th five-year plan of China, the IRA. Europe also has the EU Power Renewable Program, and there are other initiatives as well in India, etc., that increase public funds in renewable investment. Now, if you take a closer look at which public institutions are financing the global transition, you'll see that state-owned FIEs have the larger share. However, majority of this is coming from Chinese state-owned FIEs as well. Similarly, for private investment, you'll see that institutional investors and corporations are the leading private investors. When I speak of household and individuals, it's specific to private households just putting on solar panels or have like small energy saving batteries and stuff like that. So we see a clear trend that the global investment in climate mitigation and adaptation is growing. However, this growth is very uneven. The IAE report stated that majority of the increase is coming from the advanced economies and China, but when you look at emerging markets and also Caribbean and Latin American states, it's either stagnant or minimal or negligent at best. So why is this the case? Why is there low investment? There are several reasons why developing states are experiencing low capital flow towards climate mitigation. But I put forward that debt servicing might be one of the issues that we need to look into more, and particularly debt servicing and fossil fuel production per se. So in this section of the presentation, I performed some basic descriptive analysis and simple analysis to examine the interplay between debt servicing and fossil fuel energy production, particularly for 47 low and lower middle income countries that produce fossil fuel. And what I found was that these countries actually increase fossil fuel production in order to service their debt, and therefore they forego any type of climate mitigation policy as well. And this is actually a symbiotic relationship between debt servicing and fossil fuel, as they speak to each other and create this commodity dependency among these countries, making it harder for them to actually reject taking the oil out of the ground, quote unquote, and trying to put it in alternative energy. So let's look at the context. We're going through a debt crisis in developing countries. You can see that in 2010, it was about $7 billion, and in 2021, it's north of $1.6 trillion. And that's the total external debt stock. And when you look at the debt servicing, you also see an increasing trend as well. And this is problematic. It highlights the debt crisis among these countries. Now, because I wanted to look at the debt crisis and the fossil fuel production to see how we can detangle or decouple these two within developing countries, I wanted to look at the overall trend of fossil fuel production in these countries. We do see that total coal production and natural gas production in these countries are increasing. However, total petroleum production have seen a decline overall. Overall, fossil fuel production among these countries, it's either stagnant or increasing overall. Therefore, there isn't a trend of decoupling from fossil fuel type of energy to alternative source of energy. And when I compare fossil fuel production to renewable energy production, you can see the large gap between the two, with the red line is fossil fuel production and the blue line renewable energy production. So I wanted to test whether there is a statistical link between the level of fossil fuel production that these countries produce in order to service their debt. And what I found was that there is indeed a statistical link. The first model is a simple OLS, and the second is using fixed effect. The dependent variable is debt servicing, and using the independent variable as fossil fuel, and then control variables that are related to the whole idea of debt servicing. Now, the coefficient on the first model, the OLS, is 701. It's really large. I explained this away by the scaling difference. Fossil fuel is measured in BTU, which is often like 0.00% unit. And debt services is in dollar, but also remember that these countries are highly dependent on fossil fuel, and therefore you can categorize them as mono-economy. So obviously the production of fossil fuel would be very important for debt servicing, particularly external debt servicing. You see, if you look at GDP growth rate, we found that when GDP growth rate increase, there isn't a need to borrow external fund anymore. Therefore, debt servicing also decrease as well. So it highlights that debt servicing is an important part to mobilizing, canceling debt servicing and debt in general, particularly external debt, is an important part of the puzzle in mobilizing climate finance in these countries, particularly fossil fuel producing developing state. Now, there are other channels through which this relationship rests on. So the ability to access new debt is also heavily reliant on the oil price. During commodity booms, the country can rest assured that they can hedge their borrowing on the price as well, and it also fluctuates. So during commodity price fall, oil price fall, spending cuts are often foregone, and therefore the governments often borrow external funds to maintain the level of spending, whether it's in quote-unquote productive sector or political rent-seeking. But we see that there is a cycle as well regarding commodity prices. Also, creditors seems to bond the future revenues from fossil fuel extraction to lending, particularly in Suriname. What we found was that Suriname a lot of their external borrowing agreements is bonded to future revenues of fossil fuel. So there are two creditors, I believe, that has bonded future earnings from fossil fuel, where they will get around 30% of the revenues from fossil fuel as well. Therefore, these countries are in a cycle continuously to be dependent on fossil fuel, not just to provide energy for their country, and but to also service external debt as well, because they have to generate foreign exchange revenues. There's just another explanation of fossil fuel production increasing, where developing countries have acknowledged that fossil fuel production will increase based on state policy. However, in the same breath, they're highlighting that yes, we do believe in the 1.5 degrees Celsius mandate, and we are working towards it. And they have stated policies. However, there are also government projects to increase fossil fuel production as well. And majority of these states argue that the reason they're doing this is to service their debt. I also wanted to highlight that even when governments do engage in renewable energy project, it's normally through debt financing, where you see around 90% of the renewable energy projects within the 47 country was financed through debt. So that's also concerning, that even projects that should be geared towards saving the planet has a premium on it. Now, I wanted to look at some case study to bring the point home, particularly the Democratic Republic of Congo. We see that their external debt is ballooning over the for 11 years. And I wanted to point out that one of their ministers highlighted that DRC's priority is not to save the planet, and that revenue generation is to help finance the country's poverty reduction program, and that developed countries should use the Amazon as a precursor of what developing countries will do if they cannot feed their population. And that is why in this project I'm suggesting that debt forgiveness, debt relief, debt reduction should be a major part of the climate stabilization policy. So if you look at, this is supposed to be linear, the linear prediction plot line, I'm looking at a predictive model where I look at the total external debt servicing and fossil fuel production. You see that it's positively related. Therefore, when total external debt servicing is increasing, fossil fuel production is also increasing. However, if you look at debt forgiveness grants, therefore when when DRC receives debt forgiveness grant, fossil fuel production goes down, and therefore that highlights the point that I want to drive home, that debt forgiveness, debt grants are very important tools that we can use to lower production. Also, if you look at similarly debt forgiveness and debt reduction, if you increase that, renewable energy production as well goes up within DRC. Now, this is just a predictive linear model. However, it does give you a sense of the relationship between the two. I found similar results in Cameroon as well, that as the external debt increased, fossil fuel production also increased. And when debt forgiveness is at the center of climate mitigation, you see that renewable energy also production also increases as well. So yeah, that is the end of my presentation. Yeah.